Welcome to The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. We're on volume 2 now. I will be reading chapters 20 and 21. Well, we have Helen, who is wildly in love with Arthur Huntingdon. Arthur Huntingdon, there's something off-putting about him. You can't put your finger on it, but there's little clues. I think he speaks a little bit disrespectfully to Helen herself and of her relations, especially her aunt. And he seems to run with a wild crowd. He seems to be very flippant about things that are perhaps esteemed as serious things, especially back in that society. Helen's Aunt Maxwell thinks very poorly of Arthur Huntingdon. Her uncle, though, sort of takes a laissez-faire attitude. But Helen also feels a bit competitive for the affections of Arthur Huntingdon between herself and Annabella. When he pays attention to Annabella over her, she feels jealous. So at the end, when he reveals that he picks her, Helen, over Annabella, likening them to the difference between a peony and a rosebud in the dew, contrasting the two. And clearly the analogy would make that the rosebud is superior to the peony, although I really like peonies. We see that Helen has won. And is it true love, or is she just feeling like, wow, I have the love of this dashing fellow? So we don't know what's going to happen. We must read on. Volume 2 of The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Chapter 20, Persistence. September 24th. In the morning I rose light and cheerful, nay, intensely happy. The hovering cloud cast over me by my aunt's views, and by the fear of not obtaining her consent, was lost in the bright effulgence of my own hopes, and the too delightful consciousness of requited love. It was a splendid morning, and I went out to enjoy it, in a quiet ramble, in company with my own blissful thoughts. The dew was on the grass, and 10,000 gossamers were waving in the breeze. The happy redbreast was pouring out its little soul in song, and my heart overflowed with silent hymns of gratitude and praise to heaven. But I had not wandered far before my solitude was interrupted by the only person that could have disturbed my musings at that moment, without being looked upon as an unwelcome intruder. Mr. Huntingdon came suddenly upon me. So unexpected was the apparition that I might have thought it the creation of an overexcited imagination, had the sense of sight alone borne witness to his presence. But immediately I felt his strong arm around my waist, and his warm kiss on my cheek, while his keen and gleeful salutation, "My own Helen," was ringing in my ear. "Not yours yet," said I, hastily swerving aside from this too presumptuous greeting. "Remember my guardians. You will not easily attain my aunt's consent. Don't you see she is prejudiced against you?" "I do, dearest, and you must tell me why, that I may best know how to combat her objections. I suppose she thinks I am a prodigal," pursued he, observing that I was unwilling to reply, "and concludes that I shall have but little worldly goods wherewith to endow my better half. If so, you must tell her that my property is mostly entailed, and I cannot get rid of it. There may be a few mortgages on the rest, a few trifling debts and encumbrances here and there, but nothing to speak of. And though I acknowledge I am not so rich as I might be or have been, still I think we could manage pretty comfortably on what's left. My father, was something of a miser, and in his latter days especially saw no pleasure in life but to amass riches. And so it is no wonder that his son should make it his chief delight to spend them, which was accordingly the case until my acquaintance with you, dear Helen, taught me other views and nobler aims. And the very idea of having you to care for under my roof would force me to moderate my expenses and live like a Christian, not to speak of all the prudence and virtue you would instill into my mind by your wise counsels and sweet, attractive goodness. But it is not that, said I. It is not money my aunt thinks about. She knows better than to value worldly wealth above its price. Well, what is it then? She wishes me to marry none but a really good man. What? A man of decided piety? Ahem. Well, come. I'll manage that too. It's Sunday today, isn't it? I'll go to church morning, afternoon, and evening, and comport myself in such a godly sort that she shall regard me with admiration and sisterly love, as a brand plucked from the burning. I'll come home sighing like a furnace, and full of the savor and unction of dear Mr. Blayton's discourse. Mr. Layton, I said dryly. Is Mr. Layton a sweet preacher, Helen? A dear, delightful, heavenly-minded man? He is a good man, Mr. Huntingdon. I wish I could say half as much for you. Oh, I forgot. You are a saint too. I crave your pardon, dearest. But don't call me Mr. Huntingdon. My name is Arthur. I'll call you nothing, for I'll have nothing at all to do with you if you can talk in that way any more. If you really mean to deceive my aunt as you say, you are very wicked. And if not, you are very wrong to jest on such a subject. I stand corrected, said he, concluding his laugh with a sorrowful sigh. Now, resumed he, after a momentary pause, let us talk about something else, and come nearer to me, Helen, and take my arm, and then I'll let you alone. I can't be quiet while I see you walking there. I complied, but said we must be soon returning to home. No one will be down for breakfast yet for long enough, he answered. You spoke of your guardians just now, Helen, but is not your father still living? Yes, but I always look upon my uncle and aunt as my guardians, for they are so indeed, though not in name. My father has entirely given me up to their care. I have never seen him since dear mamma died, when I was a very little girl, and my aunt, at her request, offered to take charge of me, and took me away to Stanningley, where I have remained ever since. And I don't think he would object to anything for me that she thought proper to sanction. But would he sanction anything to which she thought proper to object? No, I don't think he cares enough about me. He is very much to blame, but he doesn't know what an angel he has for a daughter, which is all the better for me, as if he did, he would not be willing to part with such a treasure. And Mr. Huntingdon, said I suppose you know I am not an heiress. He protested he had never given it a thought, and begged I would not disturb his present enjoyment by the mention of such uninteresting subjects. I was glad of this proof of disinterested affection, for Annabella Wilmot is the probable heiress to all her uncle's wealth, in addition to her late father's property, which she had already in possession. I now insisted upon retracing our steps to the house, but we walked slowly, and went on talking as we proceeded. I need not repeat all we said. Let me rather refer to what passed between my aunt and me after breakfast, when Mr. Huntingdon called my uncle, aside, no doubt, to make his proposals, and she beckoned me into another room, where she once more commenced a solemn remonstrance, which, however, entirely failed to convince me that her view of the case was preferable to my own. You judge him uncharitably, aunt, I know, said I. His very friends are not half so bad as you represent them. There is Walter Hargrave, Millicent's brother, for one. He is but a little lower than the angels, if half she says of him is true. She is continually talking to me about him, and lauding his many virtues to the skies. You will form a very inadequate estimate of a man's character, replied she, if you judge by what a fond sister says of him. The worst of them generally know how to hide their misdeeds from their sisters' eyes, and from their mothers too. And there is Lord Lowborough, continued I, quite a decent man. Who told you so? Lord Lowborough is a desperate man. He has dissipated his fortune in gambling and other things, and is now seeking an heiress to retrieve it. I told Miss Wilmot so, but you're all alike. She haughtily answered me that she was very much obliged to me, but she believed she knew when a man was seeking her for her fortune, and when for herself. She flattered herself she had the experience enough in these matters to be justified in trusting to her own judgment. And as for his lordship's lack of fortune, she cared nothing about that, as she hoped her own would suffice for both. And as for his wildness, she supposed he was no worse than the others. Besides, he was reformed now. Yes, they can all play the hypocrite when they want to take in a fond, misguided woman. Well, I think he's about as good as she is, said I. But when Mr. Huntingdon is married, he won't have many opportunities of consorting with his bachelor friends, and the worse they are, the more I long to deliver him from them. To be sure, my dear, and the worse he is, I suppose the more you long to deliver him from himself. Yes, provided he is not incorrigible. That is, the more I long to deliver him from his faults, to give him an opportunity of shaking off the adventitious evil got from contact with others worse than himself, and shining out in the unclouded light of his own genuine goodness, to do my utmost to help his better self against his worse, and make him what he would have been if he had not from the beginning had a bad, selfish, miserly father, who, to gratify his own sordid passions, restricted him in the most innocent enjoyments of childhood and youth, and so disgusted him with every kind of restraint, and a foolish mother who indulged him to the top of his bent, deceiving her husband for him, and doing her utmost to encourage those germs of folly and vice it was her duty to suppress. And then such a set of companions as you represent his friends to be. Poor man, said she sarcastically, his kind have greatly wronged him. They have, cried I, and they shall wrong him no more. His wife shall undo what his mother did. Well, said she after a short pause, I must say, Helen, I thought better of your judgment than this, and your taste, too. How can you love such a man, I cannot tell, or what pleasure you can find in his company, for what fellowship hath light with darkness, or he that believeth with an infidel? He's not an infidel, and I am not light, and he is not darkness. His worst and only vice is thoughtlessness. And thoughtlessness, persisted my aunt, may lead to every crime, and he will but poorly excuse our errors in the sight of God. Mr. Huntingdon, I suppose, is not without the common faculties of men. He is not so light-headed as to be irresponsible. His Maker has endowed him with reason and conscience as well as the rest of us, and scriptures are open to him as well as to others. And if he hear not them, neither will he hear though one rose from the dead. And remember, Helen, continued she solemnly, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and they that forget God. And suppose even that he should continue to love you, and you love him, and that you should pass through life together with tolerable comfort. How will it be in the end when you shall see yourselves parted forever? You, perhaps, taken into eternal bliss, and he cast into the lake that burneth with unquenchable fire, there forever to— Not forever, I exclaimed, only till he has paid the uttermost farthing. For if any man's work abide not the fire, he shall suffer loss, yet himself shall be saved, but so as by fire. And he that is able to subdue all things to himself will have all men to be saved, and will in the fullness of time gather together in one all things in Christ Jesus, who tasted death for every man, and in whom God will reconcile all things to himself, whether they be things in earth or things in heaven. Oh, Helen, where did you learn all this? In the Bible, aunt. I have searched it through and found nearly 30 passages, all tending to support the same theory. And is that the use you make of your Bible? And did you find no passages tending to prove the danger and the falsity of such a belief? No, I found indeed some passages that, taken by themselves, might seem contradict that opinion, but they will all bear a different construction to that which is commonly given. And in most the only difficulty is in the word that we translate everlasting or eternal. I don't know the Greek, but I still believe it strictly means for ages and must signify either endless or long enduring. And as for the danger of the belief, I would not publish it abroad, if I thought any poor wretch would be likely to presume upon it to his own destruction. But it is a glorious thought to cherish in one's own heart, and I would not part for it for all the world can give." Here her conference ended, for it was now high time to prepare for church. Everyone attended the morning service, except my uncle, who hardly ever goes, and Mr. Wilmot, who stayed at home with him to enjoy a quiet time of cribbage. In the afternoon, Miss Wilmot and Lord Loughborough likewise excused themselves from attending, but Mr. Huntingdon vouchsafed to accompany us again. Whether it was to ingratiate himself with my aunt, I cannot tell, but if so, he certainly should have behaved better, I must confess. I did not like his conduct during the service at all. Holding his prayer book upside down, or open at any place but the right, he did nothing but stare about him, unless he happened to catch my aunt's eye or mine, and then he would drop his own on his book with a puritanical air of mock solemnity that would have been ludicrous if it had not been so provoking. Once, during the sermon, after attentively regarding Mr. Layton for a few minutes, he suddenly produced his gold pencil case and snatched up a Bible. Perceiving that I observed the movement, he whispered he was going to make a note of the sermon. But instead of that, as I sat next to him, I could not help seeing that he was making a caricature of the preacher, giving to the respectable, pious, elderly gentleman the air and aspect of a most absurd old hypocrite. And yet, upon his return, he talked to my aunt about the sermon with a degree of modest, serious discrimination that tempted me to believe he really had attended and profited by the discourse. Just before dinner, my uncle called me into the library for a discussion of the very important matter, which was dismissed in a few words. "Now, Nell," said he, "this young Huntingdon has been asking for you. What must I say about it? Your aunt would answer no, but what say you?" "I say yes, uncle," replied I, without a moment's hesitation, for I had thoroughly made up my mind on the subject. "Very good," cried he. "Now, that's a good honest answer, wonderful for a girl. Well, I'll write to your father to-morrow. He's sure to give his consent, so you may look upon the matter as settled. You'd have done a great deal better if you'd have taken Wilmot, I can tell you, but that you won't believe. At your time of life, it's love that rules the roost. At mine, it's sordid, serviceable gold. I suppose now you've never dream of looking into the state of your husband's finances or troubling your head about settlements or anything of that sort?" "I don't think I should." "Well, be thankful then that you've wiser heads to think for you. I haven't had time yet to examine thoroughly into this young rascal's affairs, but I see that a great part of his father's fine property has been squandered away. But still, I think there's a pretty fair share of it left, and a little careful nursing may make a handsome thing of it yet. And then we must persuade your father to give you a decent fortune, as he has only one besides yourself to care for. And if you behave well, who knows but what I may be induced to remember you in my will," continued he, putting his finger to his nose with a knowing wink. "Thanks, uncle, for that and all your kindness," replied I. "Well, and I questioned this young spark on the matter of settlements," continued he, "and he seemed disposed to be generous enough on that point." "I knew he would," said I. "But pray don't trouble your head, or his or mine about that, for all I have will be his, and all he has will be mine, and what more could either of us require?" And I was about to make my exit, when he called me back. "Stop, stop!" cried he. "We haven't mentioned the time yet. When must it be? Your aunt would put it off till the Lord knows when, but he is anxious to be bound as soon as may be. He won't hear of waiting beyond next month, and you, I guess, will be of the same mind, so—" "Not at all, uncle. On the contrary, I should like to wait until after Christmas, at least." "Oh, poh, poh! Never tell me that tale. I know better," cried he, and he persisted with his incredulity. "Nevertheless, it is quite true. I am in no hurry at all. How can I be, when I think of the momentous change that awaits me, and of all I have to leave? It is happiness enough to know that we are to be united, and that he really loves me, and I may love him as devotedly, and think of him as often as I please. However, I insisted upon consulting my aunt about the time of the wedding, for I determined her counsels should not be utterly disregarded, and no conclusions on that particular are come to yet. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21. Opinions. October 1st. All is settled now. My father has given his consent, and the time is fixed for Christmas, by a sort of compromise between the respective advocates for hurry and delay. Millicent Hargrave is to be one bridesmaid, and Annabella Wilmot the other. Not that I am particularly fond of the latter, but she is an intimate of the family, and I have not another friend. When I told Millicent of my engagement, she rather provoked me by her manner of taking it. After staring a moment in mute surprise, she said, "Well, Helen, I suppose I ought to congratulate you, and I am glad to see you so happy, but I did not think you would take him, and I can't help feeling surprised that you should like him so much." "Why so?" "Because you are so superior to him in every way, and there's something so bold and reckless about him, so I don't know how, but I always feel a wish to get out of his way when I see him approach. You are timid, Millicent, but that's no fault of his. And then his look," continued she. "People say he's handsome, and of course he is, but I don't like that kind of beauty, and I wonder that you should." "Why so, pray?" "Well, I think there's nothing noble or lofty in his appearance. In fact, you wonder that I can like anyone so unlike the stilted heroes of romance. Well, give me my flesh and blood lover, and I'll leave all the Sir Herberts and Valentines to you, if you can find them." "I don't want them," she said. "I'll be satisfied with flesh and blood too, only the spirit must shine through and predominate. But don't you think Mr. Huntingdon's face is too red?" "No," cried I indignantly. "It's not red at all. There's just a pleasant glow, a healthy freshness in his complexion, the warm pinky tint of the whole harmonizing with the deeper color of the cheeks, exactly as it ought to do. I hate a man to be red and white, like a painted doll, or all sickly white, or smoky black, or cadaverous yellow." "Well, tastes differ, but I like pale or dark," replied she. "But to tell you the truth, Helen, I had been deluding myself with the hope that you would one day be my sister. I expected Walter would be introduced to you next season, and I thought you would like him, and was certain he would like you, and I flattered myself I should thus have the felicity of seeing the two persons I like best in the world, except mamma, united in one. He mayn't be exactly what you would call handsome, but he's far more distinguished looking and nicer and better than Mr. Huntingdon, and I'm sure you would say so if you knew him." "Impossible, Millicent. You think so because you're his sister, and on that account I'll forgive you. But nobody else should so disparage Arthur Huntingdon to me with impunity." Miss Wilmot expressed her feelings on the subject almost as openly. "And so, Helen," said she, coming up to me with a smile of no amiable import, "you are to be Mrs. Huntingdon, I suppose?" "Yes," replied I. "Don't you envy me?" "Oh dear, no," she exclaimed. "I shall probably be Lady Lowborough some day, and then, dear, I shall be in a capacity to enquire, 'Don't you envy me?'" "Henceforth I shall envy no one," returned I. "Indeed. Are you so happy then?" said she thoughtfully, and something very like a cloud of disappointment shadowed her face. "And does he love you? I mean, does he idolize you as much as you do him?" she added, fixing her eyes upon me with an ill-disguised anxiety for the reply. "I don't want to be idolized," I answered, "but I am well assured that he loves me more than anybody else in the world, as I do him." "Exactly," said she with a nod. "I wish—" She paused. "What do you wish?" asked I, annoyed at the vindictive expression of her countenance. "I wish," returned she with a short laugh, "that all the attractive points and desirable qualifications of the two gentlemen were united in one, that Lord Lowborough had Huntington's handsome face and good temper, and all his wit and mirth and charm, or else that Huntingdon had Lowborough's pedigree and title and delightful old family seat, and I had him, and you might have the other and welcome. Thank you, dear Annabella. I am better satisfied with things as they are for my own part. And for you, I wish you were as well contented with your intended as I am with mine, said I. And it was true enough, for though vexed at first at her unamiable spirit, her frankness touched me, and the contrast between our situations was such that I could well afford to pity her and wish her well. Mr. Huntingdon's acquaintances appear to be no better pleased with our approaching union than mine. This morning's post brought him letters from several of his friends, during the perusal of which, at the breakfast table, he excited the attention of the company by the singular variety of his grimaces. But as he crushed them all into his pocket with a private laugh, and said nothing till the meal was concluded, then, while the company were hanging over the fire or loitering through the room, previous to settling to their various morning's avocations, he came and leant over the back of my chair, with his face in contact with my curls, and commencing with a quiet little kiss, poured forth the following complaints into my ear. Helen, you witch, do you know that you've entailed upon me the curses of all my friends? I wrote to them the other day to tell them of my happy prospects, and now, instead of a bundle of congratulations, I've got a pocket full of bitter execrations and reproaches. There's not one kind wish for me, or one good word for you, among them all. They say there'll be no more fun now, no more merry days or glorious nights, and it's all my fault. I am the first to break up the jovial band, and others in pure despair will follow my example. I was the very life and prop of the community. They do me the honor to say that I have shamefully betrayed my trust. You may join them again if you like, said I, somewhat piqued at the sorrowful tone of his discourse. I should be sorry to stand between any man or body of men and so much happiness, and perhaps I can manage to do without you as well as your poor deserted friends. Bless you, no, murmured he. It's all for love or the world well lost with me. Let them go to where they belong, so to speak politely. But if you saw how they abuse me, Helen, you would love me all the more for having ventured so much for your sake. He pulled out his crumpled letters. I thought he was going to show them to me, and told him I did not wish to see them. I'm not going to show them to you, love, said he. They're hardly fit for a lady's eyes, the most part of them. But look here, this is Grimsby's scrawl, only 3 lines, the sulky dog. He doesn't say much, to be sure, but his very silence implies more than all the others' words, and the less he says, the more he thinks. G.D. him. I beg your pardon, dearest, and this is Hargrave's missive. He is particularly grieved at me because, forsooth, he had fallen in love with you from his sister's reports, and meant to have married you himself as soon as he had sown his wild oats. I'm vastly obliged to him, observed I. And so am I, said he, and look at this. This is Hattersley's, every page stuffed full of railing accusations, bitter curses, and lamentable complaints, ending up with swearing that he'll get married himself in revenge. He'll throw himself away on the first old maid that chooses to set her cap at him, as if I cared what he did with himself. Well, said I, if you do give up your intimacy with these men, I don't think you will have much cause to regret the loss of their society, for it's my belief that they never did you much good. Maybe not, but we'd a merry time of it too, though, mingled with sorrow and pain, as Lowborough knows to his cost. Ha, ha! And while he was laughing at the recollection of Lowborough's troubles, my uncle came and clapped him on the shoulder. Come, my lad, said he, are you too busy making love to my niece to make war with the pheasants? 1st of October, remember. Sun shines out, rain ceases. Even Boreham's not afraid to venture in his waterproof boots. And Wilmot and I are going to beat you all, I declare. We old uns are the keenest sportsmen of the lot. I'll show you what I can do today, however, said my companion. I'll murder your birds by wholesale, just for keeping me away from better company than either you or them. And so saying, he departed, and I saw no more of him till dinner. It seemed a weary time. I wonder what I shall do without him. It is very true that the 3 elder gentlemen have proved themselves much keener sportsmen than the 2 younger ones, for both Lord Loughborough and Arthur Huntingdon have of late almost daily neglected the shooting excursions to accompany us in our various rides and rambles. But these merry times are fast drawing to a close. In less than a fortnight, the party breaks up, much to my sorrow, for every day I enjoy it more and more. Now that Messrs. Boreham and Wilmot have ceased to tease me, and my aunt has ceased to lecture me, and I have ceased to be jealous of Annabella, or even to dislike her, and now that Mr. Huntingdon is become my Arthur, and I may enjoy his society without restraint, what shall I do without him? I repeat. End of chapter 21.